Good afternoon. My name is Annie Kamara. I'm one of the festival committee, and we can't say this enough. Thank you for being here at our 7th annual Nantucket Book Festival. See a lot of familiar faces. Thank you very much. This festival belongs to you all. We endeavor to keep all of our most of our events free and open to the public, and as long as you keep coming, we'll be here for you. Thank you for reading, thank you for your presence, and thank you for your support. We give special thanks to our sponsors here, the White Elephant, the Athenaeum staff under Molly Anderson, the executive director, and I'm always in this room, seeing people in this room with books surrounding. It's such a joyous place. It's a spiritual place for people who are readers, and it's really wonderful to have you here with us. Michael Schulder, is here with us to talk to Anna Badkhen, and I promise this is going to be an extraordinary session. Take my word for it. It's going to make you laugh and cry. And you'll learn some things you didn't know before and have some things validated. I could go on and on about this, but Anna is a tremendous observer and a tremendous writer, and I'm really glad you're here to hear her. Many of you know that prior to his current project, a podcast called Wavemaker, a podcast for the insanely curious, Michael had a long career in television journalism. 3 years as writer for the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, 5 years as writer for Peter Jennings on ABC World News, and then 17 years as senior executive producer at CNN. And among his many projects, he's a member of the Nantucket Festival Board, for which we are so grateful. Those of you who have come to other presentations where he has been in conversation with a writer know how talented he is, how funny he is, and it's just wonderful to have him be part of us. Please welcome Michael, who will talk with Ms. Badkhen about her remarkable life in writing. Thank you so much.
Is this on? And Annie, who always introduces me to the best authors, said, "You've got to speak with Anna Badkhen." And so for the past few months, I've been absorbed in your work, thoroughly absorbed. And she said, "Why don't you introduce Anna?" And it's a bit of a struggle because of how prolific you've been and how deeply you've immersed yourself in societies that most of us have no experience in or are not familiar with. So I'll just read the top few lines from a little blog I wrote for the festival site. For 2 decades, Anna Badkhen has wandered what we used to call the Third World and now call the Global South, documenting the world's iniquities. To what end, I asked you on the phone when we spoke, and you cited the Polish poet Zbigniew Herbert, who wrote this: "You were saved not in order to live. You have little time, you must give testimony." And so Anna Badkhen is here to testify, but after Annie's intro, should we make them laugh first or cry?
I think you're the one to make them laugh. I'll do the other thing. Hi, thank you everybody for coming.
Well, Anna, I'm going to start with that question that Morgan Park said is sometimes offered aggressively, but in my case, it really isn't. Please, where are you from?
So I grew up in the Soviet Union. I worked most of my life in the Global South. I currently live in Oklahoma. I moved to the United States when I was 28. That was in 2004. That's the standard answer.
Okay. We'll reveal more later, but last night you and I had a drink, and you said something that really struck me, and it gets at the heart of your approach, and then hopefully this will lead to you introducing us to some of the people who you've really become friends with, and really they a part of your life and you a part of theirs. You said, I trespass for a living. Please take it from there. Tell us how you trespass for a living, and some of the things you have discovered in your trespassing, maybe starting with some of the things you've discovered and relate to us in Fisherman's Blues.
I'm a slow thinker. Michael is much faster than I am, so there will be a lot of pauses. I enter places and ask for permission to stay for a while. I was a journalist. For 15 years, I was a war correspondent, which is very fast-paced. I would move from place to place, often a new town every day, writing a story every night. But that is not the pace at which I can understand anything anymore. So when I'm curious about something, when I want to learn something, I ask people to allow me to stay long with them, several months. So that's where the trespass happens. I basically come into your home and say, I would like to learn from you. Do you mind if I stay a year? That is a very good reaction. That is the reaction I normally get. People laugh because it's a very strange request. And then miraculously, amazingly, people say yes, which to me, and I said I was a war correspondent for 15 years. I have witnessed incredible violence that we commit upon one another, but at the same time, tremendous generosity and kindness that we also share with one another. And I always hold my breath a little bit when I ask, may I just hang around for an indefinite amount of time, months, a year? And when I get invited, I never, it's so astonishing to me that somebody would actually say, sure. And it's always a celebration, I think, of how kind we are, how generous we are.
Which, despite the horrors you've seen, at least as a war correspondent, must give you some sense of optimism or hope.
Hope?
Hope is good, not necessarily optimism, but hope. That's well. Let's talk about you inviting yourself into this Senegalese village, and the book you've just written, Fisherman's Blues. Particularly interesting that they said, "Come on board onto our ancient fishing ships." The pirogues, are they? Tell us about the pirogues and the fact that you are a woman. And they said, yes, come on board, is particularly interesting. So please talk about that and explain that.
So this book, I think many of you who are storytellers know this, that we learn as we go, and this book is born of the previous book, and that book was born of the book before it. I grew up in the Soviet Union, so I grew up behind the Iron Curtain, and I spent most of my life trespassing, crossing borders. For somebody who grew up knowing for sure that I would never, ever, ever cross a geopolitical border, and then crossing borders all the time, not just borders of countries, but also borders of the possible, borders of the desirable, according to my parents, who have witnessed me cover conflicts. I'm fascinated by all kinds of borders, personal borders, emotional borders. How do we set boundaries? How do we allow our boundaries to fluctuate, how we shift them for a lover, how we build them for our enemies. So I wanted to learn about borders from people who have, for generations, been crossing what, to my mind, before I went to work in Joal, crossing the utmost boundary, the boundary between the terra firma, the solid, and the unfathomable, the ocean. So I wanted to learn from fishermen who work going to sea day in, day out, which is how Nantucket at one point was born. Knowing that in fishing traditions the world over, a woman on board is a bad omen, it's a bad sign, knowing that would probably create some difficulty. But we were talking about trespassing and borders, so that was, I guess I was going to see whether my friend, my hosts would accommodate and would shift their own border of what they considered acceptable.
And they did, and clearly you learned a lot from them. What, as best you can you communicate to us? And in fact, there's a passage which I know you have ready there, which I would love to hear you read, because there's, you learned some very interesting things there that we could never experience ourselves. So.
Well, I think we were talking about this last night. The myth that a woman on board is a bad sign, which fishermen carry all over the world, is just one of the myths that we carry. And I think one of the things that I keep returning to in this book, and also in my conversations and as an activist and as a writer, is how each of us has a myth that we grew up with, or myths, a system of myths maybe that we grew up with that we don't notice because they're so familiar to us. What we do notice are mythologies of the others. And I keep thinking, well, what if we were to, by paying attention to the mythologies of people, to mythologies that differ from our mythologies, what if we were to imagine that when we interact, it's not just us humans who interact with one another, it's actually our mythologies that are bouncing off of one another, and making an allowance for that, and also thereby allowing that our mythologies might be fraught, questioning our own mythology. So I am going to read this passage. So this is my friend Nongo Soare, who's a fishing captain. He and a bunch of his elder friends are sitting in a gazebo by the seaside, and Ndongo asks me, "Do you know this fish?" And he shows me a photograph or a cell phone screen. "A friend sent me this photo. I wonder if you can catch one of those here. It's a real fish, but I've never seen a fish like this before." A fading seascape, orange beach in the foreground. At the tide line, a voluptuous horizontal figure, the head and torso of a fish from which grows a pair of woman's legs, pale and sensuously curved. A modest blur over the creature's woolly pubis. The old men bring the screen close to their opaque eyes, suck their toothless gums in wonder. Says Pa Yagamar Khan, "Such fish don't live in these seas. These things only live very far from here, maybe in Asia or Europe, where the sea is deeper. I used to watch documentaries about Europe, but I've never seen such a fish." says Pa Usman Sal. There are fish in other places that are different from the fish we have here. It depends on the weather, on the air temperature, on the temperature of the sea. I saw animals in the north that have so much fur, if they came here, they would die of heat stroke. The phone returns to Ndongo. He plays with the screen, makes the sexy woman fish grow larger, closer. I know a fish called Mami Wata, he says. The bottom is fish, the top is woman. Mami Wata, they catch it here sometimes. I've seen it. It looks like a young woman on the top. She has silky hair like yours, Anna, and breasts, but the bottom is fish, and at the end of her tail there are scales. Mami Wata, I've never seen anyone eat it. But there's another big fish called manatee. We eat that, but it looks like fish, not like a woman. Mami Wata is the protector genie of Guinea, says Pa Usman Sal. No, of Côte d'Ivoire, says Pa Barajo. Yes, Côte d'Ivoire, you're right. But she is also the genie of all the ocean, says Pa Yagmar Khan. A mischievous and demanding protectress of the seas, the symbol of lust and fertility, often cradling between her bare breasts a large snake that has represented divinity and wisdom and the occult since Eden. She governs the ocean as Watamama in Suriname and Mamandlo in Guadalupe, La Sirene in the Caribbean, Yamanya in Cuba and Brazil, the mermaid or siren in Europe. In Australia, she is Yak Yak, and the serpent that keeps her company is a water spirit that may be her father, her spouse, or Yak Yak herself. I ask Ndongo to draw Mami Wata in my sketchbook. He explains as he draws. Mami Wata has webbed hands. She has another web between her elbow and armpit right here, so she cannot extend her arm fully, only like this. Her skin is light, like yours. I pretend not to hear that the sea goddess of Ndongo's fantasies is a long-haired white woman, force it to slip my mind. If I want to keep the company of men at sea, I must always evade the confines and expectations of gender and race. For the most part, Ndongo and my other crewmates and neighbors play along, cross boundaries of convention by taking me aboard, treat me as a kind of a liminal creature. They let me haul and pick and bail as if I were another man, though all politely look away while I relieve myself into the bailing can. I watch Ndongo draw. His strokes are so tentative, I think at first my pen has run out of ink. Decades since the last time he drew on paper. The breasts of his Mami Wata are sad, deflated triangles like mine. As for the thing on my phone, Ndongo says, usually they come from other countries. One day, a few years ago, some fishermen from Bur, a fishing port between here and Dakar, caught Mami Wata in their net. She spoke to them in a human voice and asked them to release her. They refused. They brought her to Mbur, where people at the harbor looked at her and touched her. Finally, they killed her. The next day, the pirogue whose crew had caught her capsized, and everyone on board died. I heard some people in Bur ate the meat. Anyway, your sketchbook is too small. Look, the tail is much longer, and the whole fish Mami Wata is really the size of a normal woman. Ndongo hands the sketchbook back to me. The mermaid takes up the entire 4x6-inch sheet. Broad face, a pyramid of wavy hair almost to the shoulders, those spent breasts. Her massive tail splashes off the pad somewhere. What did she taste like, I wonder, fish or flesh? Ndongo says, I don't know exactly how they killed her. I never saw her, only a photo. And Pa Barajop adds, in this life, people shouldn't say, this thing doesn't exist. They should say, I haven't seen it yet. So one thing that doesn't happen in the book is I don't question stories that are told to me. Because I'm not sure I have the agency to do so. And I've had conversations in which readers said, but you have to believe something. If you write it, then that means you believe it. And I say, why? Why do you think that that's the case? And they say, well, you have to tell us. And it's such an interesting consumerist demand. And I was speaking to actually high schoolers, mostly Western high schoolers in Dakar, Senegal, last month, at an international school, and they said, "But you have to tell us what you believe." And I said, "Why don't you think?" And it was such a novel idea to young people from the West.
Well, you're a thinker, and in fact, last night when we were talking, I remember I asked you a question, and you sort of looked like this. It was 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and I thought, this is why I haven't seen you as a TV guest on the news. The control room would be in a panic. What's she doing? I think she's thinking. She can't think. So I'm not sure. I don't know why people want to know if you believe that story. What fascinates me is you were able to take that story, we've talked about it, and apply it in some ways to your own life and your own myths. I'm fascinated by that myth you grew up with that you can share with people that, most of us...
Oh, yeah. It's a very simple one. And I'm sure that a lot of you in the room actually have the same thing. So
Because I must interrupt, because when we hear that story, it's like, come on, mermaid, of course it's not true. And then you start thinking about your things that you took for granted as true. Maybe it's not, and a story like that can bring it to life.
So how many of you were taught to wash your hands when you come into the house, when you were playing outside? Exactly, me too, right? So I grew up in the Soviet Union, but apparently it's a myth that is widely shared. We were taught to wash our hands. Now I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is the most unregulated state in the union, and Tulsa is rimmed by petrochemical factories, and we have earthquakes now because of the fracking that goes on, and who knows what's in that water. And still, every time I come home, I just can't help it. I go, I take off my shoes, and I go to plop to the bathroom, I wash my hands with that water, though it's quite possible that my hands were cleaner before I touched the water. But I'm convinced that that will keep me safe.
Well, and let me ask you about their myths, because they have a myth that women on those boats are bad luck. Did you prove to be good luck or bad luck for them?
Both, actually. The first time I went out with Ndongo Soare, who is the captain with the sexy fish, we got a lot of fish, and he said that I was good luck. But then, because they say that when you have a person go on your boat for the first time and there's a big catch, that's good luck. But then I went out with a friend who lost his net when we were fishing. The net caught on one of the boats, one of the sunken boats that litter that part of the Atlantic, and that was a fishing boat. There are other much more tragic boats that litter that part of the Atlantic, the slave ships that didn't make it very far offshore, uncountable. So his net got snagged, and we yanked and even broke a piece of a boat trying to yank that net off the sunken fishing pirogue, and eventually lost the net. And then later he told me that his friends told him, duh, what are you thinking, taking a woman on board? And I asked him, and I said, well, do you think that it... I felt... Do you know this feeling like you realize that you did something terrible without meaning to, and kind of the blood drains and you go really cold? Like I remember, sometimes I get it from since childhood, when I didn't realize that I committed some sort of terrible offense, and then just realizing, oh my God. And that's how I felt. And I was actually, he chewed me out. He was lying down, he has a bad back, so he was lying down on the sand and I was standing over him. And I felt like I was in 4th grade. And he was telling me, and here's the thing, my friends are telling me that it's because of you. And I said, well, what do you think? Because of course I need, affirmation, and as we all do. And he said, I don't know, they say things.
Well, which was pretty kind of him and strong, because clearly it was your fault.
Well, actually, I'm not sure that he meant it one way or another. I think he just let it be there. He said, I don't know,
Well, let me ask you, earlier you said that, one book leads into another, and we started with your most recent book. So I'd like to rewind a little bit, because your book, Walking with Abel, Journeys with the Nomads of the African Savannah, incredible book, and back on terra firma. And you wrote at the time, you said you were a guest. And most reporters say, oh, we're reporting, we're embedding. That is not your case. You're not going as a reporter. You become a guest. So you were a guest of the ancient Fulani cattle herders.
They weren't ancient.
Well, no.
These are my friends. The patriarch is pretty ancient, but he's probably in his 70s. So, by Fulani standards.
And I will edit that afterward. So the Fulani cattle herders of all ages you were with, and you said you went there to learn from their journey lessons of adaptation and survival. And so this is another place where you spent, a year or so?
About a year.
With the nomads. And there are I think I read there are about 30 million nomads around the world, people who have a nomadic lifestyle.
I think if I remember correctly, there are between 30 and 40 million nomads in the world. And by nomads, we mean cattle herders who move. And about 25 million of them are Fulani, which means at least more than half of all nomads. So this is the chronology. I'm going to just save us complicated puzzle making. So I was a war correspondent, and I worked in Afghanistan for a very long time, kept returning, and had this deep-seated frustration with how the conflict in Afghanistan was portrayed in the West, especially in the United States. In general, having covered the Bush Wars, to me, the American coverage of these wars was sort of like, I don't know if how many of you remember this Expedia ad where there's a garden gnome that shows up in and here's the gnome in front of the Eiffel Tower, and here's the gnome in front of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So this was kind of what American wars looked like if you were just reading the paper here or watching TV, no offense. Here are our troops on the ground, boom. Here are our troops on the ground, place X, Y, and Z. And I had been working for years with people who experience war, especially in Afghanistan, and this is not at all how my friends experience war. They don't experience it as an American thing. They experience it as a state that has been continuous for 2,300 years. And the American invasion is just the latest iteration in this continuity of war that is caused by just where Afghanistan is. It's in this coveted spot between all these crucible of empires. So I wanted to correct that. I wanted to write about that, and I also wanted to write about how we persevere. So first of all, the history of humanity is a history of violence. We are in conflict most of the time. How are we here? What happens? How do we still fall in love? How do we still make love? How do we still have babies? How do we still want to keep going? And also, how do we create so much beauty, even in the direst of circumstances, the beauty of objects, the beauty of music, the beauty of literature, the beauty of poetry. And, we just heard Morgan read tremendously beautiful work about very hard stuff. So how do we do that? So I went to Afghanistan and worked in a village that makes carpets, the most beautiful carpets in the world. That, I didn't say that, Marco Polo said that, actually. So, and the people I worked with had been nomadic. And after working and and living and spending time in this village, I thought, I wonder what it was like for their ancestors, because they had settled about 300, 200 years prior to my arrival, but most of their existence, they had been nomads herding sheep. And I thought, what is it like to experience the world at 3 miles an hour? Because that is how we evolved to, as humans, right? We evolved to experience the world flat, low shrub, at the pace of 3 miles an hour. What does that do? How do we see it, if that's what we do? Can I spend some time with people who have been doing that forever? And Fulani, nomadic Fulani, go back to what we call the Agrarian Revolution, right? 10,000 years ago or 12,000 years ago, humans decided that they could grow stuff and herd animals. And the Fulani, the ancestors of the Fulani were among the first people who domesticated cow. So what is it like to be constantly leaving? And what is it like, because nomads don't just go from, Boston to LA and then off to Mexico City. Nomads move in an annular fashion. So what is it also like to be always returning?
So give us just a very vivid description. So put us in the skin of a Fulani right now. What is it like just one day of taking the path, going in the footsteps of a Fulani nomad?
Well, one day is actually very uneventful. You wake up, you tell your cattle to go, cattle go, you go with the cattle to water and to forage, and then you come back to camp.
Which is why most people wouldn't have the patience to learn what you learned. So tell us about day 1 and day 200 and what became clear to you because of some specific detail.
Are you trying to tell me something?
Well, you know what I'm trying to say is that your books are packed with such vivid details, and I just want you to be able to share with this group just one memory, one very detailed memory that's sort of just got implanted in your mind.
That's such an interesting, I have to say that it's a request that I get often, and I'm always like, what do you mean? I mean, I lived for a year.
Oh, so give me 100. We'll take 100.
Just,
by the way, this is the book. This is The World Is a Carpet, but
yeah,
I don't have a copy of
we
the.
don't have a copy
Well,
of that.
just.
So, what is devastating and beautiful and strange is that my hosts, the family I worked with, they move in a fairly small circle. The amplitude is maybe 50 miles over the course of the year, and it's a very slow movement. So there will be a camp that will be set for 4 months, and then there will be a camp that will be set for 2 weeks, and they're basically chasing clouds is what is happening. Basically, there's a rainy season when farmers will plant, so you have to get off of farmland because nobody loves a nomad. Everybody hates people who move. Look at what's happening with the migration in the world right now. Everybody's very suspicious of people on the move. So this is a Cain and Abel story, right? the idea of somebody who is nomadic is not welcome. So farmers will kill Fulani who have cows that trespass on farmland. So Fulani have to move away from where crops grow during certain seasons, but they also have to be considerate of the distance between forage and water for the cows. So basically what we're looking at is there's a fairly specific and not very large cycle that respects the movement of the clouds, the movement of water, the growing season. In Mali, when I was working there a few years ago, had the highest child mortality rate in the world. But the thing about that is that I think 1 in 4 people under 5, 1 in 4 children under 5 in Mali died mostly of disease related to malnutrition. But the Fulani, because they're nomadic, they're not counted, and the rate of child mortality is much higher in nomadic communities. So every campsite is also a cemetery, and every stop is a return to tremendous pain. And I was, experiencing my own loss when I was working with the Fulani, and I was learning what it's like to let go, and what do you hold on to, and what do you let go of as you move. Just imagine this return and this parting that is continuous, and how you persevere through that. How do you continue to walk on? How do you continue to... So I guess that's a sort of a similar theme as with the world as a carpet, this idea of perseverance at a time of, or in a lifetime of pain.
So is there, because that's something everybody can relate to, is there something that you came away with from the cumulative work you've done, the cumulative experiences, that says, this is it, this is the essence of how one moves on and continues moving forward in the face of grief and pain?
No.
Maybe something? Well,
Don't American me.
you say don't American. Well, so the answer is no. But what were the last words in from the fisherman or the old elder fisherman who said don't?
You haven't seen it yet.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to your next book where you come up with the definitive answer. I've seen it.
Concise. Yes.
Yes. Let me ask you. I would
Maybe
like
a T-shirt.
I would like to. I want to bring up one quote from a previous author, and then do we have 10 minutes just to ask questions? Do you think we can do that? Okay. I'm going to bargain with you. Sit for a few minutes. Okay, so 5 minutes, 10 minutes max, 15 tops. That's fine. There was a last year, Will Schwalbe, whose book was Books for Living.
The end of your life book.
No, but the more recent one, Books for Living. And yeah, and there was a book that he referred to, and my gosh, I can't remember, but the quote was, and we talked a little bit about this last night, but the quote was, in this book, a high school principal or teacher advises the kids, what if we had a rule that said, be a little kinder than is necessary? And you talked about the kindness and compassion you've experienced in the middle of horrific wars. And then you said, maybe if we just repeated, like a mantra, kindness. And
Decency, actually. It was
say again?
decency. Just
Decency
being decent.
Decency was your word, but so I'm stealing, I'm transforming it to kindness, but kindness and decency. And Morgan Park actually did this very effectively in a different context where she repeated, is Morgan here? I don't know, but, Morgan. Hey! You were so uplifting to me. No, no, because I think there's hope after, when you express what you expressed, I think. But anyway, that's why, because you're able to express it. But you said the body is a person. How many times did you repeat it?
It's said like a number of times in the book, but I just say it until I think everyone has heard it.
And so
Nice.
that's what we talked about last night. How many times do you have to talk about, kindness, kindness, kindness until people can, all of us, can internalize it and act on it?
Well, I think you have to talk about it all the time. I don't think that there is a finite number. I don't think that there is a magic number. There are magic numbers in the world, but I don't think that you need to stop. I think that we don't have a language for kindness. I think that we don't have a language, we actually don't have a language for a lot of things. For all the writing and reading that we do, we don't have a language for shame. We don't have a language for love. We don't have a language for kindness and decency. I think we need to start coming up with that language and utilizing it all the time, constantly. I think we have a language for efficiency and speed, but that's not where it's at.
Does anybody, would anybody like to ask Anna any questions? Yes.
Do you learn the languages of the people that you live with?
I do, and then I forget them.
Yes. Oh, did you have a
Sorry.
follow-up? No. Oh.
I thought I heard you say, don't American me.
I did do that. Michael was trying to get me to say something concisely and definitively.
It's a good thing, right? But not always. Not everywhere. Yes.
Are we unique in not having those languages of kindness?
Say again, are we?
Unique.
As a human, as humans?
English speaking.
Oh, I wasn't talking about language as in the English language. I think that I think that the language is rare. Maybe in some spiritual communities, maybe some people, maybe some hermits who have taken a vow of silence know those languages, but they won't tell you. But I don't think that we're unique. No.
Yes, Emma.
When you move into somebody's home, have you know that it's safe? And have you ever had an experience where you left the home because it felt uncomfortable or something like that?
How do I know that I'm safe?
Yeah, how do you know that you're in a safe situation since you don't know the people you're moving in with?
I don't know. But the thing is that most people in the world are not safe. So I think I focus more on whether the people around me are safe. Because I'm much safer than most people. I have an American passport, usually a return ticket, my white skin, so I'm pretty safe. But people I work with, and I have, well, not right now, but usually I do have health insurance too. So, yeah, I don't think a lot about my safety. I think a lot about the safety of people I work with, because often I work with people in situations where my presence could actually be unsafe. So that's a huge concern, especially in places of conflict, where I could cause a lot of danger to my hosts and my friends. So that's something that I think about a lot. Yeah.
Yes.
Good question. It's an artist residency. It's a temporary thing.
Yes.
I'm curious about how you're drawn to an area. Because you talked about the Fisherman's Blues, the boundary between the land and the sea, and then there's the interest of it being Senegal, and then there's the issue of the reduced fish population. So what draws you to an area to spend time there?
Well, so my work, I mean, I'm an activist writer, right? My work is an effort to bring the world to some accountability for the iniquities that it commits against itself. So that's why the fish population and other things about the sea, the rising sea levels, et cetera, et cetera. Senegal was a happy accident. I happened to know a couple who were a power couple. She was the head of the UN agency in charge of, I think, marine protection West Africa, and he was the head of the African Union department that oversaw fisheries in West Africa. And they said, oh, you want to work with fishermen who work in a traditional way? So there are 12 million traditional fishermen in the world whose work is being drowned out by a mechanized industry that employs about 500,000 people. But we're talking trawlers, many of which are operating illegally, that essentially vacuum the sea of fish. So this couple I was talking to, they said, oh, well, and they were both based in Dakar, so they probably were biased, but I don't care. They were knowledgeable, and they said, you should go to, not just to Senegal, they said, you should go to this particular town, because it is the largest artisanal fishing port in Senegal. So I went to this town, which is the largest artisanal fishing port in Senegal. It's also one of the first places of landfall for Portuguese slave traders in the 15th century, before Columbus. So it has, for me, as a person who lives in the Americas now, it has tremendous historical meaning. Had it not been for that tremendous iniquity, this country wouldn't be. So it's a haunting place to be. And there are these little signs that just keep you remembering. For example, the entire coast, that entire part of the coast of Senegal has nopal cactus growing. And nopal cactus is native to the Americas. And so that's so you walk past it and you say, and you have to double take. And then you understand how it ended up there. So and also, you know, Senegal is a point of departure for not the majority, but for a lot of pirogues that are taking humans to Europe, which, you know, 400 years ago was stealing people from Africa, and now it's pushing people back, which is also pretty messed up.
Last two questions. Annie?
Earlier, I think you said that you intimated that you're not an optimist. How long do you think you will always have to persevere all your life as an activist?
Well, I think I would be just taking up space if I weren't.
How come you gave her a definitive answer and you couldn't give me one?
Next question.
Last question. My new friend from North Carolina, who I... Go ahead.
How does your growing up in the Soviet Union affect your being an activist? What out of that experience brought you to where you are?
Maybe oh gosh. I mean, there is no control group, right? There is no other Anna Badkhen that grew up in, you know, Helsinki or... I think questioning authority and probably is a large part of it. I also grew up a Soviet Jew, which was a persecuted minority, so that probably has an effect. But I don't know. There are a lot of former Soviet Jews who are not writers and are doing something else. I don't know. But I think that mistrust of dogma, right, is probably, because it was a very dogmatic society, and I learned to question it.
You know what?
There's a very tall question in the back. Yes.
Yes.
When I grow up? I'm visiting right now. I'm working on a novel. It's set in the United States, set on the border of West Texas and Mexico.
Anna, I think we're going
Thank
to
you.
wrap it up here. Thank you so much, and I strongly urge everybody to immerse yourself in her work.